Hey everyone, John P. here. If you've been following this channel for a while, then you know I have been a big fan and advocate of Omega watches. I frequently have provided them as an alternative to many brands, including Rolex, and I myself have also included many of their watches in my personal collection, and I've sold many when I owned part of Del Rey Watch. We had stocked and sold so many Omega watches, and truly, I can say that I've handled just about all of them. And something that I've noticed, and perhaps you have as well, is that the Omega watch retail prices have continued to climb. Now, of course, labor costs internationally have gone up. Switzerland is not an exception. Components, sourcing, materials, marketing, inflation, all of these things have contributed to the retail prices of Omega watches going up considerably over the last handful of years. But in the year 2024 now, does Omega still provide great horological value? Or perhaps is it time to look outside of these kind of blue chip brands to find a little bit more value or bang for buck if that's something that you're interested in? In this video, I'm going to be covering whether or not Omega still offers great horological value. Are Omega watches really worth it anymore? I'm going to be covering the brand perception, the movements, the reliability, the feeling of quality, which is going to be a little bit subjective, but I'll give you some of my thoughts and insights, having handled truly so many of them, as well as the price retention. These things, I believe, make up whether or not Omega watches are worth it. So make sure to stick through to the end of this video so that you can make the choice for yourself. First, let's start with the Omega watch brand perception. About 20 years ago, Omega started on a journey, a path to increase the value of their perception in not only watch collectors' eyes, but certainly mainstream, just enthusiast and casual buyers' eyes. They started partnering with James Bond and trying to go a little bit more mainstream, of course, also providing watches for the Olympics, which they've done for a very long time, but really doubling down on these things and focusing on things that made them special, these things, but also including NASA, right? The Speedmaster, the man on the moon. These types of things Omega really focused on to create this sense of luxury, special, uniqueness, and that's what allows a brand to increase their prices, but also become considered to be more luxurious and worth it in the eyes of collectors and buyers. This is just simple marketing. So Omega has been truly after this for a few decades, and it really has worked, in my opinion. Also, speaking with collectors and just looking out there in the world, I see Omega watches on so many more people's wrists. You see them more on celebrities. Joe Rogan wears Omega watches where he could truly wear anything, and I think that's a testament to kind of where Omega has come from where they once were to where they went. Now they are. The brand perception today has certainly increased a lot, though it's not to the point yet where it's truly synonymous with luxury. It's still considered maybe an alternative in the eyes of many, especially casual buyers. Many people, if you're not an enthusiast, you just think of Rolex or maybe Audemars Piguet because they spend a lot of money putting their watches on celebrities and, sponsoring different tennis matches and things like that, and really kind of trying to be where the money is, which Omega hasn't always done, though they've done so increasingly, but nowhere near Rolex. And when you look at the brand perception, the feeling is kind of like they're in the same realm as Rolex, but they're certainly not as recognizable. And that's just where Omega is. So lots of brand perception equity that has been built, but maybe not as far as they could go. Now, next, that takes us into the movements. Now, over the last couple of decades, Omega has truly spent a lot of time, energy, and focus, money, funds reinvesting into their manufacturer movements. They have coaxial movements, whereas they used to just put more or less stock ETA movements in their watches. Now, of course, ETA is owned by Swatch Group. Omega is owned by Swatch Group. So it makes a lot of sense. That's kind of the standard play, or was the standard play in luxury watches, Swiss watches, is to just use your movement manufacturer to pop in the movement and really make it more about the other things, the design, the aesthetics, some of the case construction quality, dial design, these things. And so Omega has shown, I believe, to collectors and those looking for a little bit more than some of the other brands offering, in their movements. Their coaxial movements are so well decorated, and many, if not most of their watches feature sapphire display casebacks, which of course enthusiasts like, but you can also see it as a casual buyer as well. That now I know this point here might not resonate with the enthusiast, which most of us are going to be, but for the casual buyer, they truly do kind of just like to marvel and look at the movements. Now, it's not going to be an A. Lange & Söhne level finishing, but for most casual buyers, it's still going to be really astounding and beautiful to look at and see that finely decorated movement. And with some brands, including Rolex, you really just don't get that, except for in modern days, there's a handful of select tiny references where maybe, you'll be able to see the movement. But even so, the Omega coaxial movements are just so far along in terms of their technology, their fit, and their finish. And Omega has come such a long way to try to at least convey that they're now in a different place and perhaps are worthy of charging additional retail price. Now that takes us into reliability. Now, when I was one of the owners, of course, I was a founder of Del Rey Watch, delreywatch.com. I had since, if you haven't watched this channel, I sold my stake in the business just a handful of months ago. But, running the company for 7 years, we had a service center. And of course, Omega was I believe our third most popular brand based on the volume, just the number of watches sold and traded, Omega watches. So we had a lot of Omega watches coming through the door in either direction, service and sales. And I have to say that Omega watches, anecdotally, my experience, are just so reliable. And if there ever was a problem, they were resolved pretty quickly. Omega watches just seem to be rugged, durable, and they don't give up anything like we just talked about, the design, the decoration, the fit and finish of the movement. So they manage to actually provide a really great movement to look at and kind of marvel over, but also a movement that's going to be rugged and durable. And if you buy something like an Omega Seamaster or a Speedmaster and it's a tool watch, a sport watch, you can knock it around and you can rest assured that it's still going to be ticking and working. Whereas when you get into some in-house caliber movements from some brands that are maybe smaller in production volume, they just don't have really that kind of volume to determine what issues are going to come up at scale because they just don't make enough watches. And Omega makes and sells a ton of watches. So in terms of reliability, I do think that Omega is truly towards the top, especially if you're looking for something that you can kind of knock around. Now, this one takes us into kind of the perception of quality. Now, of course, we can look at the specs, the type of metal. We could try to dig up, okay, where are they sourcing the metal? What types of machinery or what kinds of people are going to be finishing it. But instead, I think it's more interesting and probably more telling of the types of buyers and the thought process in collectors and buyers' heads to just talk about at least my experience handling them and how they feel in terms of quality, right? Because I think luxury goods tend to be more emotional purchases, right? Like, why would someone be looking at the specs and say, I'm going to buy the watch that has the best specs? No, there's a lot of design, there's a lot of feelings, there's kind of brand associations, there's all these things that come into play with luxury goods and certainly luxury watches. So just looking at kind of the raw specs and saying, hey, what's the best? I don't think makes the most sense here because these are expensive and generally expensive purchases are emotional. And in terms of feeling of quality, there have been some watches where personally I just didn't think it was there. Like when the new Aquaterra came out a couple of years ago in the 38 millimeter size, I just didn't think it was really there in terms of the bracelet construction. But for me, I think it was maybe just too shiny, polished to a level where it was just trying to be more bling as opposed to kind of more watch collector's watch in terms of like, needing a watch that you can kind of like knock around and wear every day, something you would see from like an Oyster Perpetual bracelet with not polish. Omega went a different road with their alternative. Nonetheless, the feeling of the quality on Omega watches today is high. You hold a brand new Omega watch, go to the boutique, get a new Speedmaster, and even just comparing a new Speedmaster with a Speedmaster that came out 20 years ago, sure, they look similar, but you can feel the quality. You can feel that it's just more durable, it's rugged. You can feel it in the bracelet, it's tighter. You can see kind of the angling on the cases. Some people like to complain and say, oh, the case is too sharp. Oh, the bracelet pulls my hair or something like that on your wrist. Hey, I get that. But in terms of, holding these watches today in your hand, I believe truly that they've come just such a long way. And if you held a Rolex in your hand, you held an Omega, comparable models, it can be pretty difficult to just feel that one is better than the other or one looks better than the other. I think it really just comes down to preference, but certainly there's nothing that I can think of when holding or wearing a modern day Omega watch that's going to lead me to believe, they cheaped out here, or maybe this doesn't feel like a luxury product. But I'll say that with a lot of brands, even brands more expensive than Omega, sometimes they just get a miss or a flop in their catalog where whoever made the dial, whatever contract manufacturer, just didn't do it. And that's something you don't see today with Omega watches. And lastly, let's talk price retention. Now, if you watch this channel, you know me, you've been here for a while, you know that I always recommend to buy what you like and you're going to wear and enjoy, and not necessarily just focus on price retention. But who wants to lose money if you don't have to, right? And sometimes, depending on if you're making a choice between two similar watches, you both like them, specs are similar, they look alike, and you really could go either way. Maybe you choose the option that's just a little bit more affordable. That's your choice, not mine. You're free to obviously do anything that you'd like. But with Omega watches, price retention, it's not Rolex price retention on average. There's some models, right? Let's not talk about the limited release Speedmasters and things like that, which have come down in price. But in terms of price retention, Omega outperforms most brands, but it's not outperforming Audemars Piguet, Patek Philippe on average, depending if it's a sport model. Of course, go figure. It's not outperforming Rolex. So it's still up there in terms of price retention. I mean, if you bought a new Omega watch and you paid retail, yeah, if you went to sell it pre-owned, private party, yeah, you're probably going to lose about 40%, probably going to lose about 50 to 60% if you sold it to a dealer. But for watches that are produced in quantities like this and at volume outside of the super hot and desirable models, outside of the Rolex, outside of Audemars Piguet, outside of Patek Philippe, that is actually pretty good. Now, I know that doesn't feel good, but in terms of, if you went out and you bought a Cuervo y Sobrinos, which I like, or if you went out and bought an Oris, or you went out and bought a Tag Heuer, these are going to take even more of a loss in value if you went to go sell it after buying it at retail. So just kind of a caveat to this, in terms of price retention, if you buy the watch pre-owned to begin with, that's going to be the best way to retain value on the watch, maybe even increase if you bought it right. But that's just how luxury goods are in general. And if you do like the Omega watches, I think that if you have it in your collection and you wear it, you're really looking at a few cents per day difference here in terms of value retention. And I personally don't seem to mind because, once again, I have some Omega watches in my collection and I wear them and I don't think, how much value or price am I retaining in this watch? I'm thinking, hey, I love to wear this watch sometimes and it's great and I like it. That's how I view it. So guys, I think in summation here that Omega, although their retail prices have come up considerably, I think that they still are pretty good value. Now, I rarely recommend paying retail price ever on a watch or basically everything if you don't have to, right? So if you hunt around or if it's a new watch that came out, think the new white Speedmaster Professional, the white dial Speedmaster Professional. Many people want that. Just wait a little bit, let someone else that's not an enthusiast, that doesn't come on here, that likes and subscribes, that watches these videos, let someone else take the hit. Let someone else that didn't do the research, didn't do the homework like you do, because you're watching this video, let someone else take that hit. And then when they get bored and they don't value the dollar or whatever currency they bought it in, let them dump it and then buy it at 30% off. Buy it at 40% off. And then it's so much value that it's not even comparable to most watches out there in terms of what you get bang for buck for the price. I think Omega has to be one of, not if the best watch, that if you buy it right, you buy it pre-owned, it's just offers so much horological value that cannot be matched by other brands bang for buck. But I want to know out there from you guys, what do you think about this? Are there any, Omega lovers, or maybe some people, a little apprehensive at buying one of these watches just in favor of some of the more other, blue chip brands like the Rolex, like the Audemars Piguet? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to see it and hear it. And guys, we'll see you next time. You've been chatting with John P.